Pierre Poilievre, thank you so much for joining us.
It's good to see you, Sean. It's been a little while.
We have so much to talk about. I'm really grateful for the opportunity. And we have to start with the recent election campaign.
Yeah.
On June 19th, on January 19th, betting markets predicted that there was a 90% probability that we would be Canada's next prime minister. How have you come to think about what happened?
Well, geez, it was if your starting point is July, you said January 19th. A lot happened in that time. We got in a very short period of time, President Trump's tariffs and his 51st state talk. The Liberals replaced their leader. The carbon tax disappeared. The coalition ended, all in a very short period of time. And ultimately, the NDP collapsed to monumentally low levels.
Yes.
And, if you look at our numbers, they didn't actually come down that much. We got 41.3%, which is the highest we've got since '88. So what happened was that everything else consolidated around the Liberals and on one basic issue. We made great gains, a couple million more votes, 2.5 million to be precise, and about 25 more seats. It wasn't enough to overcome that consolidation. And but we have to build on the coalition that we've established. Like it's a new group; they're voting for us now.
Yes.
We brought in a lot of youth, union workers, newcomers to the country, a lot of people who'd never voted at all that came out and cast a ballot. And now our challenge is how do we crystallize that? How do we keep these people inspired? How do we actually deliver for them the best we can in opposition?
Yes.
And then add the 2 or 3 percentage points more of people who didn't come out for us this time so that we can get over the top next time.
I'll ask you a bit about how you build on the gains in the last election, but you mentioned Donald Trump, and he, of course, was a big part of the story. It became evident during the campaign, Pierre, that he didn't want you to be the next prime minister. What do you think's behind that?
I don't know. I mean, I would be theorizing, so I don't want to speculate on why, but my purpose was to put our country first and foremost, repatriate more production here, make us more self-reliant and independent, hit other markets by getting our most precious resources to places that will pay us the full price.
Yes.
And enrich our people. And so I'm a Canadian patriot, maybe a bit of a Canadian nationalist, and that's the agenda that I have on the U.S. issue. In opposition, we're saying we'll work with the government to try and overcome these tariffs and hopefully just get back to a sane, free trading arrangement with the Americans that served both countries so well for so long. Well, obviously, we're not going to just support any deal, but we want a deal to happen so that, the steel workers in Hamilton, the auto workers in Windsor and Oshawa and southwestern Ontario, the energy workers out west get their jobs and get better lives. So that's how we're going to be approaching it going forward.
If you'll permit me to follow up, you're someone who's not just a conservative politician, but someone who's spent his life in the world of conservative ideas.
Yeah.
Do you think Donald Trump is a conservative?
I mean, I don't know if I would, I don't know what label to put on him. He's got his own approach. My approach is the one you see when you hear me speak. And that's what I consider to be conservatism. But I'm not going to put a label on another foreign leader because at the end of the day, we're going to have to do business with President Trump. He's going to be president for the next 3+ years. And you never know, I might be prime minister before that time is up. So I'm not going to, I'm going to have to potentially do diplomacy with him or his successor.
Yes.
And so I don't think, I appreciate the try, but I don't want to get into the game of labeling a foreign leader with a particular ideological brush.
Fair enough. You mentioned the issue of consolidation in the election. One way to think about it is that you successfully consolidated the Canadian right.
I don't know if I even call it the Canadian right, though. I mean, people who voted for us, a lot of them wouldn't even consider themselves to be on the right. They were, I think of all the guys I met in union halls across the country. I don't know. I mean, 10 years ago, someone might have said that they were on the political left.
Yes.
I think what we brought together was a a coalition of people who were desperately working to make lives better for themselves and their families, but were held back mostly by government policies, and they were inspired by the agenda I had to give them back control of their lives.
Yes.
I don't really think, the whole left-right thing I don't really think describes very much in the real world. I think the nature of our coalition is one of the folks who work extremely hard. Disproportionately now, there are people who make stuff, move stuff, fix stuff, and build stuff. And they really want to earn a good life for themselves. They're not asking for any kind of a favor. They're just asking for a chance.
Yes.
And I think we're really becoming the party of opportunity.
Yes. Yeah, there's no doubt that a big part of the election story and really the lead up to the years leading up to the election is the political realignment. It's happening in other parts of the Anglo-American world, but I think it's fair to say in the last election, the Conservative Party under your leadership did the realignment just about better than any center-right party in the world. The reason I mentioned the subject of consolidation, though, because as you say, it also happened on the left and center-left. And it prompts the question in my mind, Pierre, as you're thinking about how to build on the gains in 2025. How do you think about the role of the New Democrats, which is to say, if we are entering a period of essentially two-party races, at least in English Canada, how will that influence Conservative Party planning and strategy?
Well, I believe there was two New Democratic parties contained in one. There was, the woke, trendy, elitist New Democratic Party. And obviously those activists and those people did not vote for me.
Yes.
But there's a lot of great, working class, blue collar, hardworking, common sense people who've been voting NDP for generations.
Yes.
Because they saw it as a party of the little guy. And they believed that the NDP would get in there and scrap it out for them. And even if they wouldn't form a government. But what they saw, though, was increasingly with parties that, call themselves progressive or liberal, and I know I've already criticized the term, but left, it was increasingly special interest causes that don't affect people's lives or actually make life worse.
Yes.
And that working class group in places like Timmins and
Thunder Bay.
West, Thunder Bay, yeah. We didn't win Thunder Bay. We did very well there.
Yes.
But we won in Timmins. We won in Windsor West. We won in London Fanshawe, 3 Vancouver Island ridings, 2 in the interior that were held by the NDP, 1 in Winnipeg where we elected a union worker from an IBEW electrical background. And so that the working people really rallied around us. And I think we're seeing that around the world, there is a realignment. And it is because, traditionally we think of the idea of growing the government was supposed to make it redistribution that was going to take from the rich and give to the working poor.
Yes.
But that's not what's happening. As government's getting bigger and bigger, it's actually reverse redistribution. They're taking from, I always like to say, taking from the have-nots to give to the have-yots. And the state is really, as it expands, has become a way of taking from hardworking people, making them poorer, and then there's a very small group of an aristocratic elite that gets the benefits of that. And I think that's why you've seen a lot of the union workers that had been traditionally in the NDP come to the Conservative Party. We offered them hope of home ownership, hope that they at the end of the month they'd look at their paycheck and see something still left, hope that they'd be able to save up for their kids' education, hope that their hard work would pay off, hope that they'd get a job building a pipeline or digging a mine or doing some other great industrial job that the country needs. And also just respect. I think one of the reasons why we did so well with trades workers is because I said to them, what you do is important.
Yes.
For the longest time, there's been this stereotype that you have to go to university and wear a suit and all that. And that's great. That's what I did. I went to university, I wear a suit. So I'm not bashing that. But we have totally underestimated the importance of the people who literally do make things with their hands,
Yes.
and actually even more so with their minds. It's brain work. And I'm the first federal leader who has spent this much time and spoken so much about the importance of those people, even though I don't have a trades background myself. I wish I did. I think a lot of them were inspired to hear somebody tell them, look them in the eye and say, what you do matters. This country cannot function without you, and we're going to make the country work for you too.
Let's stay on the subject for a minute,
Sure.
because it's one that we've written and talked a lot about at the Hub, the notion of the realignment and the extent to which we are seeing changes in the conventional conservative coalition. I know you're a bit averse to talk in these generalized terms about right and left and so on, but just bear with me.
Sure.
As you make these gains and bring these new and different voters into your coalition, what types of adjustments do you think need to be made to conservative orthodoxy so that they find that that there's not just a welcoming political home, but they have an agenda that's responsive to their interests and needs?
Well, when you say conservative orthodoxy, what do you mean by that?
Limited government, a disposition to deferring to markets, as you say, some suspicion about the excesses of redistribution, a general and historically a general aversion to extensive rule for trade unions, these sorts of things.
Okay, well, there's a lot of things packed in there. First of all, what we've seen with trade unions themselves is that they're increasingly very entrepreneurial. They're a lot more entrepreneurial than some large corporations.
Yes.
They first of all, they only get paid if their workers get jobs. So they train these young people. If you train a young person as a trade union hall and you don't actually get them a job, well, then you don't collect dues.
Yes.
So that's not the case with universities, right? Universities can train you up. You don't get employed. They've already got your tuition.
Yes.
They have to compete for, they and their employer have to actually compete for jobs. So they have to be able to deliver high quality at good prices. Increasingly, they have their pension funds, which then invest in the economy. So they are not just, they're not just workers, but they're business owners. And they also, if you sit down with them and ask, what's your priorities? It's not, let's go attend an anti-Israel protest or some other crazy radical cause. It's
Yes.
let's get that pipeline approved. Let's speed up home building permits. Let's get taxes down on diesel fuel. Let's protect, and for their members, let's protect the rights to own firearms for hunting and sport shooting. So, I mean, their basic agenda is the same as what we believe. So I think trade unions are going to play a very important role in the future of the Conservative Party. I was meeting with some of them today, and I want them to come out to our convention and put their stamp on our policy agenda. But more broadly, this is where, see, increasingly, as I said earlier, the government intervention that's happening in the economy is not happening to the benefit of the working people. It's happening against their interests. I'll give you some examples. The government spending that leads the deficit spending.
Yes.
Who does that hurt the most? Well, first of all, it ends up printing cash. So what happens then? Inflation. So who does inflation hurt? It hurts the wage earner, because the super rich, they can inflation-proof their assets and sometimes get inflation positive
Yes.
benefits, especially if they're able to leverage debt, which then goes down in real value with inflation as their assets go up in nominal value. Whereas the wage earner ends up way worse off because the money he earns is buying him less. This is an enormous wealth transfer from the working classes to the super rich. And I think the working class in the Western rural has been absolutely robbed over the last 50 years. If you think about it, say 50 years ago, over the last 50 years, the amount of food you get off of an acre of farmland is quadrupled. The amount of milk you get out of a cow has gone up by about the same amount, just through production.
Yes.
And yet food prices have skyrocketed. So how is it that, we produce more food with less land, less fertilizer, less labor, less fuel, less water? All the costs of producing food have gone down, 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 down for 50 years, and yet the price of food has skyrocketed.
Yes.
Why is it that you take you pay 20 times more for an ebook today than you paid for a hard copy book 40 years ago. Even though that hard copy book had to be printed, you had to buy the ink, you had to bind it, you had to ship it, you had to rent a bookstore.
Yes.
Okay, so what does all this have to do with the working people? They have been, despite the enormous increase in production, that should have dramatically lowered prices because of enormous amounts of money printing, their purchasing power has gone down. And that is the reason why we have so much inequality. Now, that is not a market failure. That is a government failure.
Yes.
So that this did not happen because the government just stood back and did nothing and let the marketplace function. It happened because the government stepped in, flooded the economy with cheap cash, and ultimately carried out a huge wealth transfer from the working poor to a very small group of wealthy elite, and from the wage earner to the people who, through no fault of their own, live off assets. But that is one of the reasons why I think that's the number one reason why we're seeing working people look to more conservative parties who are tighter with money, because they know that they need to preserve the purchasing power of their wages, and we're the party to do it.
We've been talking about conservative orthodoxy. What do you make, Pierre, of Prime Minister Carney's seeming nodding to the right on issues like asylum claims and defense spending? How do you effectively oppose a government that, at least in some cases, is moving on longstanding CPC priorities?
Well, we'll, in the words of Lincoln, stand with a man when he stands right and stand against him when he stands wrong. That's the approach we have to take. The other thing I would point out is that he hasn't executed on any of this. He's made a lot of promises and pronouncements, and he doesn't have clear plans to actually implement any of it. So I think that the opposition that we will end up presenting is on the failure to deliver on all of the promises that he's made. He's going to have a hell of a time bringing his party along for that journey, if he really plans to go on that journey. And I think that as the time goes on, we'll see that a lot of it was more rhetoric than reality. Look at spending, for example. He's introduced a spending bill that has government spending of 8% in 1 year. And this is on top of the Trudeau spending. It's not like he inherited a miserly, starving government that had been slashed and burned for a decade. No, it's the biggest, fattest government we've had in a generation.
Yes.
And his first spending bill was to fatten it up even more. So I don't think we have to get carried away with the idea that Carney is going to take all of our ideas. He has tried to plagiarize the words, because we won the debate. We won the debate on the carbon tax, on inflation, on natural resources, on housing, and now everyone has to at least pretend they agree with us because the population does.
We're going to come to some of those issues before we wrap up, but you alluded to potential tensions within the Carney coalition. I want to raise one specific issue where the government has been ambivalent, ostensibly in response to some of those internal dynamics, and that is the subject of Israel, where even on Iran, the message seems to be one of so-called de-escalation.
Right.
What do you make of the Liberals' weak support for Israel?
Unfortunately, it's now nothing new. They became an anti-Israel party under Justin Trudeau, and Mark Carney has continued in that vein. They've singled out Israel for unfair and unbalanced, disproportionate, and I think really disgusting treatment. Yes. The Israelis had a choice. You let the Iranians nuclearize, and then it's too late, because once they've got nukes, what can you do?
Yes.
You can't stop them, because then they've got their finger on the button, and anything you do becomes an existential outcome. So I predicted a long time ago that Israel would do this because they had to. And I think the world has to say, look, if we were in the same situation, if we had a regime that was, I don't know the exact distance between the two countries, but let's call it, 500 miles apart, and they had a stated intention to annihilate Canada, wipe it off the map, and they were known to be working on a nuclear program. Would you not expect that your government would want to disable that program?
Yes.
And of course, the answer is yes, we would. We'd want to protect our country the way the Israelis are protecting theirs. And so they should do the government should do the right thing and stand with Israel against this theocratic, this nuclear ambition that is a threat to the Jewish people.
You talked earlier, Pierre, about winning the battle of ideas on
Yeah.
certain issue. One subject you've taken up in recent days is immigration, and I want to ask you a few questions about it, if you'll permit me. We're speaking on June 19th. Yesterday, Statistics Canada released Q1 population growth numbers that are down relative to historic highs, but still unprecedented outside of the past few years.
That's right.
What, in your mind, is the cost and consequences of Canada's rapid population growth?
Where to start? Obviously, housing in the 2022, 2023, and 2024 years, how we increased our population at a rate 2 to 3 times faster than the rate by which we increased our housing stock.
Yes.
So it's pretty obvious what's going to happen when your population is growing 3 times faster than the number of homes to house them, and you get 26 kids living in one basement in Brampton, according to that city hall. You've got a doubling of housing costs, which is not exclusively the result of the population growth. It's also the result of anti-construction policies bureaucracy, gatekeepers we have to remove.
Yes.
But housing is definitely one. We're at youth unemployment now. Unemployment among students is now 1 in 5. 1 in 5 students looking for a job can't find one. It just so happens that the very large population growth is among young people who are international students and obviously looking for work to pay their way while they're here,
Yes.
but displacing Canadians in the process. The massive growth in temporary foreign workers that has far outstripped the need has driven down wages, and the government has allowed this to continue to divide our country. So we need to dramatically reduce the numbers, end the abuse in the international student, temporary foreign worker, the fraudulent refugee claims. That all has to be ended, and we need to stop the numbers from growing while the housing, healthcare, and jobs catch up. That's the only way we're going to get things back to a level of sanity.
Yes. Today, the Hub characterized what's happened in our immigration policy over the past several years as a social experiment gone bad.
Very bad.
What do you think happened? What was behind it?
I actually don't know. Like, I don't know what caused them. From the time Trudeau took office, he was obviously pursuing a very open borders policy.
Yes.
But he did something in 2021, 2022 that was well beyond even that. They just literally opened the door and almost welcomed fraud. They did things that were I'll give you an example. Something that I can't imagine why anyone would be sitting around a policy table and think about that this was a good idea. The Harper government was responsible for a policy that if you have higher than 6% unemployment in your locality, you can't have temporary foreign workers for hotels, accommodations, and restaurants. Hotels, retail, and restaurants. Because the idea is if you've got unemployed people, they should be getting those jobs first. The Liberals got rid of that so that even in places where you had high local unemployment, employers could go around the locals and hire a lower wage temporary foreign worker. What could possibly be the rationale for that? That's not whoops, you can see what they were thinking, but it didn't turn out the way they thought. It's why would you do that? And was it a deliberate attempt to drive up profits for multinationals? Allow them to drive down wages? I don't know. I don't want to speculate, but that was the outcome.
Mm-hmm.
And the international student program, they were letting people in who clearly were not studying. They weren't even if they were going to an educational place at all, it was for a few hours a week.
Yes.
No evidence that they were studying, and they're working 40, 80 hours a week. How could that be a good idea? So I think it was part of an ideology, an open border ideology that the Liberal Party believes in and that they pushed for, and that is now we're living with the consequences. So we have to reverse that policy, and there has to be a period of very low numbers so that our housing, healthcare, jobs can catch up, and then we can start to restore what was the best immigration system in the world before they took office.
Talk a bit more about that, Pierre. I know that at different points in the past couple of years, the Conservative Party has thought, at least internally, about shifting the setting of the annual intake from a small p political decision, an effect, a decision taken by the minister, to something rooted in a formula that accounts for things like housing starts or the unemployment rate or whatever. How in effect do we get these numbers under control?
Well, we definitely have to cap population growth. Now, I say population growth because the emigration formula is that there's two parts to it.
Yes.
There's the numbers coming in and there's the numbers going out. Natural population growth in Canada is basically zero. In fact, it was negative for the recent quarter. So
yes,
when I say population growth, I'm talking really about immigration minus emigration.
yes,
we have a lot of people who are supposed to be leaving in the next sort of year. They are international students and temporary foreign workers on temporary visas that are going to run out.
yes,
So we're going to need more people to leave than to come for the next several years. And that means even having negative population growth in that time period. And then after that, we have to have a hard rule. And I proposed this a long time ago, that the growth in the housing stock, job market, and availability of doctors must always be higher than the growth in population. You can set that by the levels plan. There's something called the levels plan where the government actually sits down and pencils out how many people are going to be allowed to come in, how much our population is going to be allowed to grow. And we need to basically say, well, if we grew the number of doctors by this much, and we grew the number of homes by this much, and the number of jobs by this much, well, the population can only grow this much because we can't overload any of those systems for our own people, or it's not fair for the people who come. So it's actually a false promise if we invite people here and then they have no place to live and they can't go to a hospital when they get sick. So that's how I think we need to do it. But it's going to take a time to get back to some level of common sense.
Yeah. Let me ask about housing. Notwithstanding bold commitments from Ottawa and several of the provinces, it looks like this year housing starts will be lower than last year. How do you explain that?
Well, Carney is pursuing the same policies, but on steroids of Justin Trudeau. Trudeau's approach was to fatten up local bureaucracies with lots of federal transfers, and then they would block building with high taxes, very slow permits, and then they would create more government programs in Ottawa to subsidize builders to get over the wall that the local governments had created. So it's a classic case of a government creating a problem and then saying, well, the solution is for there to be even more government to overcome that problem. And, in Vancouver today, I think it was C.D. Howe did the study. They took the cost of building a home and compared it to the cost of buying one, and there's a $1.3 million gap between those things. It's incredible. Well, what's that gap? I call it the gatekeeper gap. It's the cost of development charges, fees, delays, taxes, lawyers, consultants, other soft non-construction and non-land related costs. And it seems to me the obvious thing to do is get rid of those costs. Let's go from having the second slowest permits in the world to the fastest. The Americans and the Brits permit housing 3 times faster than we do. They have to cut the development taxes. Like, in the Toronto area, they've jacked them up by over 1,000% in the last decade and a half. 60% of the cost of a new home in Vancouver is government. So we have to cut those costs because right now, despite the enormous sale price, builders actually don't make a lot of money.
Yes.
So the buyers can't afford to buy, the sellers can't afford to sell, and everybody is getting screwed. It's the worst of all worlds. And so we need a policy at the federal level that incentivizes municipalities to get out of the way, speed up permits, free up land, cut development charges. And we need remove the GST from all home purchases, not just first-time buyers We're a very small percentage of buyers in the first place, particularly of new homes. And finally, I think one idea that would cause a massive boom in our economy, it'd be like rocket fuel, is if anybody reinvests their capital gains in Canada, it should be tax-free, and that would be a big boon for the home building sector. Any cap gains people make, they could put that into home building, and they'd be really incentivized. They'll eventually pay tax on it down the road.
Yes.
But it would, in the meantime,
free up
the capital to build the homes.
You mentioned Toronto. I want to ask a specific question about the city, if you'll permit me, because here we have a unique problem where we seemingly have too much supply in small condos and insufficient supply when it comes to family homes. What's happening in that case, and how does that fit into your broader diagnosis?
So I don't think we have too many condos. I think what's happening is that the people who bought those condos did so when interest rates were lower and their incomes were higher, and now they can't close. So there are probably a lot of people that would love to live in those condos, but they're locked down with deposits, and the depositors don't know what they're going to do with them. A lot of them will walk away, but then the developer is not going to have enough money.
Yes.
And because the cost of building in Toronto is so high, the developers, if they reprice those at a lower level, they're going to go out of business. So it's not that we have too many condos. It's that there's a huge, like Frankenstein kind of screw up that happened when rates were extremely low, cash was everywhere. People made these bids, put down the deposits, and now things are much worse and they can't close. And that's another example of a crazy monetary policy, flooding money into the market and then having to pull it back later on, causing these problems. So I don't know how that problem is going to sort itself out. I think a lot of developers are going to lose a lot of money. Okay. There's going to be a lot of people who will lose those deposits, and eventually they're going to be repriced, perhaps in bankruptcies, and people are going to come in and buy them for lower prices. As for the rest of it, the shortages in the other areas, and like I said, we've got to have fast permits and low building taxes, and that's how we'll solve that problem.
You've been generous with your time. I just have a few more questions.
Sure.
One big one is about what seems to me looks like a big economic debate emerging in Parliament that involves competing visions about the role of government and markets. If you look at Prime Minister Carney's key appointments thus far, there's a sense he's looking to bring Quebec Inc., a mix of public pension investment, government spending, and preference sectors to the rest of the country. What in your mind does this get wrong? Why is it the wrong approach to boost investment and growth in the country?
Well, so I don't have any problem with the origin of his staff. I mean,
sure,
good people can come from anywhere.
Of course.
I don't care if they're from Montreal or my hometown of Calgary. If they're good what they do, I'm happy to see them. But I think what you're getting at here
is an economic philosophy,
right? And this is Carney's. His ideology is that the state should direct the economy. It's a central planning model that's failed every time it's been tried anywhere in the world. It makes a very small group of well-connected insiders vastly richer. It is state-driven crony capitalism. He believes in state-driven crony capitalism rather than free enterprise entrepreneurial capitalism. And it'll mean, big boondoggles. They'll be making big loan guarantees and grants and corporate subsidies to favored insiders. And then, of course, many of those projects will go bad, and the taxpayer will be stuck paying for them. The reality is there's no market discipline when the government is paying the bill. The government takes all the risk, and then the private sector gets all the profit. Well, you can figure out very quickly there's who's going to win in that and who's going to lose. So I believe in the free enterprise system. We should make this the best place for private sector investment, best place in the world. I mean, look at the Irish. My grandfather came over a half century from Ireland to this country the way many Irish did. Why? Because Ireland was poor.
Yes.
Now Ireland's per capita GDP is twice Canada's. And how do they do that? Well, massive tax relief, an open free enterprise economy that allows investors to build stuff quickly, start new enterprises, that rewards young people who work hard, get an engineering degree, or start a business. And it's become one of the greatest economies in the world, even though the stereotype of us Irish was that we were poor. Now it's a very rich place.
Yes.
But you look at, Switzerland and parts of the U.S., Singapore, other places that have taken this, Israel,
Yes.
that have taken this approach. They have overperformed, and those that have had big, heavy, centrally planned economies like the one that Carney favors, they've gotten poorer and poorer, and inequality's gotten worse and worse.
When you were a Harper government minister, you championed the interests of Canadian workers with disabilities, and I see disability policy, incidentally, as another possible area of philosophical distinction between you and the Liberals. The Trudeau government, of course, ran large deficits, dedicated scarce public resources to large corporations, and then bizarrely nickel and dimed the creation of the Canadian disability benefits such that a significant number of recipients will remain below the poverty line. Talk, Pierre, about your support for Canadians with disabilities, where it comes from, and the extent to which it may reflect a differing understanding of the proper role and purpose of government.
Well, the government should be there to do for people what they can't do for themselves. And there are some people who have disabilities through no fault of their own, and they need help. And it's something I've been very passionate about for a long time. Now, that help can come in a lot of different ways. One thing that people don't realize is that a lot of folks who have disabilities actually do work and enjoy working. But then they get punished through all these clawbacks and other penalties. They get their drug plan taken away. They get income support stripped very sharply.
Yes.
And ultimately, this can lead to effective tax rates of over 100%. The next dollar they earn is met with like $1.20 in lost benefits. And so they're trapped. I think the government at the federal level has a great program called the Workers' Disability Benefit. And it's meant to boost earnings for working people who have disabilities, and that gets them over that wall.
Yes.
And I think that's something we need to look at boosting. Let's make it so that anybody who has a disability, or anybody, period, who does another hour of work, gets a bonus, takes another shift, is always better off. It doesn't mean we can't do things for people whose disabilities prevent them from work. We still help them.
Yes.
But let's not make this a situation where we punish those who are frankly the most inspiring people we have, going out into the world and doing things. There's a great guy out of Whitby who started up Tim Hortons when he was very young, and he employed almost exclusively people with disabilities, and they performed extremely well. And over his career, he had hundreds of people with disabilities that were able to succeed in that workplace, and that's what we want to see more of.
I've been asking about policy areas where you and the Liberals diverge. I have to ask you about one where there's overlap, and that's media subsidies. Your election platform committed to preserving the current mix of subsidies. I have to ask why.
Well, we said we would keep the local journalism fund. That was a small fund that goes to the independent locals, and we thought that was a reasonable thing, but we ran on defunding the CBC, and we think that funding for the media should come from subscriptions, advertising, sponsorships, and other own source revenue. I think that's the future, and the cost of media has actually gone way down, as evidenced by this studio.
Yes, indeed.
How much did it cost? Can you reveal the trade secret?
We don't want to give away all our secrets,
but it would have been a lot more expensive
Indeed.
15 years ago. In fact, we might not have been able to have this conversation. So with these costs being down, I think that we should encourage more freedom and free enterprise so that readers, listeners, and viewers can direct the media rather than the government.
Here. Final question. We started with the election campaign, and I want to end there. This was your first national campaign as a leader of a national party. What did you learn about the country that you didn't already know after traveling across it for nearly 40 days?
I think it's the incredible potential of the country. Very inspiring people I met across the country, and they were very hopeful. That's what I loved so much, is seeing the hope that people had on their faces when I would meet them. And we have an incredibly well-educated, smart workforce. Our people are very patriotic. They really love the country, and they care about it. And I think that if we can unlock that potential, we could be the richest country in the world and the most prosperous with the best living standards. So I walk away from my experience going through that gauntlet very optimistic about the future of the country.
A great way to wrap up our conversation. Pierre
Thank you.
Poilievre, leader of Canada's Conservative Party, thank you so much for joining us
Great
at
to be
Hub
with you.
Dialogues.
Thanks, Sean.